Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, if there is one thing that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that this cancerous doctrine of political correctness has been utilized by the Fabian socialists in their incessant attempts to tear this nation apart at the seams. However, it goes even deeper because this doctrine works hand in hand with, or in tandem with, the other nefarious doctrine, which is that of moral relativism. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm bringing this up when there are so many other topics of du jour or discussion that could be covered right now. Well, bear with me, folks, because I think it all ties together and creates an overarching picture as to something that needs to be discussed, and something that I have a feeling that the vast majority of radio venues and programs out there simply aren't covering. Moral relativism ties into this type of moral decay that we've been witnessing unfurl all throughout this country. From coast to coast and border to border, it has been afflicting the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people. And the more vicious aspect of it is, or the more terrible aspect of it is that it is making people turn to the government for solutions, when in fact that is the very last thing that we should be doing. The government is not the solution to the problem. In fact, the government is the major contributor to the vast majority of the problems we're seeing. Dating back to our first episode, which aired on September 11th, 2015, we have warned that the departures that we've seen within our community from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution has led to the vast majority of the problems that have been unfurling before us. The type of moral decay that we're seeing, the type of societal decay that is just running rampant in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, can instantly be traced back to this notion of departing from the United States Constitution. And the reason for this is that the further the government gets away from the Constitution, the less and less influence and control the people have over the government itself. You see, it ties into this entire notion, this doctrinal notion of the United States, that the natural law is what inspired it. And the natural law in this instance is the natural order of things. Therefore, government starts with the basic fundamental building block of society. And the fundamental building block of society is none other than the core nuclear family. There's a reason that Karl Marx in all of his writings attacked the nuclear family. He called marriage, or the institution of marriage, nothing short of legalized prostitution. And as you can see, he really, really thumbed his nose at this idea of the institution of marriage. But marriage is an integral part of traditional societies, going back to the dawn of humanity. And there's a reason for it. Marriage provides the most suitable and stable environment for the rearing of children and the propagating of a particular society and community. Without it, children are put at extreme danger, and because it takes so long for human children to develop, and it takes very much effort, or a lot of effort, to make them develop the proper skills to survive, it's important that mother and father be dedicated not only to one another, but also to the children. And that is the first instance we have of a governmental body. And the way that the natural law tenets underpin this representative Republican form of government of ours is that it starts with the family. And all branches and levels of government are designed for the purpose of furthering the family, securing the family, but not just the family, the individual, fundamental, and inalienable rights of the members of that family. You see, the whole notion of popular sovereignty resting in the hands of the people is based off of this basic idea. And it was formed out of the teachings of John Locke, the English philosopher who heavily influenced our founding fathers, because if you look at the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson said that the fundamental and inalienable rights were a part of a self-evident truth, and that chief among those fundamental and inalienable rights are the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the pursuit of happiness was expounded upon to mean the private ownership of property. So you see, any of these instituted efforts, or these exerted efforts by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists on the left to destroy the notion of private property and ownership of that nature, is diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. In other words, they are intentionally attempting to destabilize the system of government and the societal fabric and framework of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And folks, this is all done on purpose. It's done intentionally to drive a wedge between the American people, to pit American citizen against American citizen. And there can be no good outcome from this. There is nothing beneficial about what they are doing. In fact, everything that they are doing is detrimental to society as a whole. And we have to be cognizant and aware of it and do everything within our power to address it to ensure that our representative republic remains viable and also that it maintains its vitality. And we see that in this election cycle, we can notice that there has been this appreciated, accelerated effort of tearing America apart. Last summer, the summer of 2015, is something that we here on Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, named the summer of political correctness. But it's even more encompassing than that, because it also included the summer of moral relativism. With the Obergefell decision, the gay marriage decision that went in front of the United States Supreme Court, they handed down a decision that was fundamentally aimed at tearing apart the traditional notions of the family. Again, the Fabian socialists engage in this sort of behavior in order to tear society apart. By destabilizing society in general, what they're hoping to gain is to replace the pre-existing structure with their Fabian socialist dystopia. Of course, this is a system of government that should never be welcomed in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. Irrespective of this fact, the Fabian socialists have just doubled down on their efforts to tear us apart. The reason being is they see a light at the end of the tunnel. They think that their goals and their objectives are within reach. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth, because as long as the United States Constitution, which happens to be the longest uninterrupted running constitutional document throughout the course of human events, is in place, they are not fully victorious. But I'm already noticing that some of their efforts have started to have a deleterious effect on the hearts, souls, and minds of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people, because they have not received much of any resistance, and any resistance they have received is mere token resistance from the former Grand Old Party. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have renamed the Grand Old Party as the Gutless Opposition Party. And when you stop and think about it, what we have seen over these past disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime is no type of resistance. There has been none. And part of the thing that my First Officer Jeremy Grapenton and I have been reiterating time and again on past episodes is that is what's understandable for making the people feel this blind sense of fury and rage that they do. Of course, it makes sense. We are mad too. Any sane, rational human being that has a care for the country at all would feel this way with respect to what's happening in our country. Because these efforts are deliberate. These efforts are there to try and tear us apart. But more than just tear us apart, it's designed to basically create this sense of normality with respect to behaviors that would have otherwise and at one time been considered perverse and unacceptable. And what it really boils down to, when you pause and take a step back and think about this, folks, is they want to make it to where no one is accountable for their behavior. Because if you think about some of the staples that creates the indomitable and unconquerable spirit of the American people, it's based on this notion of self-responsibility, self-accountability, and thereby self-determination. They don't want you to think in terms like that because they want you to be wholly dependent upon the government. It's as Alex de Tocqueville once said, that any form of socialism is actually a new age form of feudalism. And it makes a lot of sense because in feudalism, the villain or the peasant was controlled completely by the pecking order or caste system that exists within the manorial and baronage system. But our founding fathers wholeheartedly rejected that system. Our founding fathers understood that the natural law tenets expanded to include all of us. So again, we look at the foundational building block or the fundamental building block of society as being the family. It then works up to the municipal or city level of government, then to county levels of government, which are under the auspice of a more powerful state level of government, and the states, or the several states, are said to possess plenary powers, or near absolute powers, but they are not absolute in and of themselves because they are limited by the constitutions of the several states. What I'm describing here is what is known as the tenets of federalism. And there can be no question that the way that the United States government was designed was as a federalist representative republic. But again, this is not taught in schools anymore or in our institutions of education anymore because of the historical revisionists. They are the ones that perpetrate this erroneous false message that the founding fathers were a bunch of bigots, racists, sexists, who didn't care about the people whatsoever, and they were just in it for their own self-aggrandizement. Now, what this really is a type of projection that they do with respect to their own point of view. This is the way that the Fabian socialists want to rule, and they always attach their most horrific attributes to the pre-existing system so that people will be duped into thinking that the Fabian socialists will provide them with the answer. It falls down the lines of this same Cloward-Priven principle, which was developed by a couple of socialist academicians back in the 1950s to overwhelm the pre-existing systems so that the American people would crawl to the government on bended knee and ask that the government swoop in and solve these problems, which would be increased crime rates, not holding anybody accountable, creating a sense of worry and distress and destabilization all throughout the country. Now, if that sounds like a nefarious type of development or an evil type of philosophy, it's because it is. There is no morality in that. Again, that is a system that is based off of this twisted narrative of moral relativism. Moral relativism is essentially saying that all forms of morality are right, and therefore there is no true right or wrong. There is no good or evil. There is no light or dark. But we know that not to be the case because of the way that our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. These principles are deeply rooted back to the foundation of this country, stretching back over 230 years. Again, you're not going to hear this sort of analysis from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media because they are dyed-in-the-wool Fabian socialists. They have a propagandistic agenda to push forward this narrative irrespective of the detrimental and deleterious impact that it will have on the nation as a whole. That is something that has been really brewing for the past century. As I mentioned in a past episode of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, this all traces its roots back to William Randolph Hearst, who had a conglomerate of newspapers and created the doctrine of yellow journalism. Well, yellow journalism in and of itself is a system that lacks a moral compass. It is all about obfuscating the truth in order to peddle a certain narrative that might or hopefully would bring greater ratings to a particular newspaper. And from that, we see that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have developed a new type of journalism, one based on sensationalism and not based on the facts. Yet, where they have been wholly intellectually disingenuous is in this notion that they are completely objective. And it's really come to a head throughout this 2016 presidential election cycle. Even those that claimed not to be objective or claimed to be conservative, I'm talking of people like Michael Weiner Savage and Sean Hannity, they claim to not, well, at least in Hannity's case, they claim not to have picked a candidate to support, but their lopsided reporting and the type of kit-glove questions that they asked the now presumptive frontrunner of the gutless opposition party, the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian, Donald J. Trump, also known as John Barron, also known as John Miller, made it quite clear exactly who they were supporting. And it's disingenuous, but it's in line with this type of mentality that was first cemented in the thought of, or lack thereof, of journalistic integrity that was first developed by William Randolph Hearst. And of course, you notice that the terms that are used there are dubious at best. They are designed to obfuscate the truth. They are designed to move away from the things that really matter and to make a lie appear true. This has always been at the heart of the Fabian socialist agenda. They have always wanted control, and they know that they are unable to compete in the marketplace of ideas, so they turn to manipulating people's emotions. They want you to turn off your intellectual faculties and just to rawly emote, because then you become malleable like putty in the hands of a potter, or clay in the hands of a potter. They then want to reshape you, making you wholly dependent on the central government. But that is totally and wholly diametrically opposed to all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving representative republic of ours. And again, it's all part of their twisted narrative that has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. This is why we have been warning you about the games of semantics that the frothing at the mouth left plays ever since our first episode. It's because it is truly disingenuous. It is truly destructive. But more importantly than that, it furthers and perpetuates this doctrine of moral relativism. And that allows them to go in and to challenge the traditions and institutions of our nation, to go after the notion that we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Well, if the people lack a knowledge of how their government came into being and what it is that their government has always stood for, then the people will more easily allow there to be nefarious changes to the entire structure and foundation of our country. And that has been the plan for the past century and a half. The Fabian socialists are very patient. And one of the areas where moral relativism can trace its beginnings goes all the way back to John Dewey, who is considered to be the father of American public education. And he always spoke of the minds of the children in the form of a collective. But if you really stop and think about what it is that our founding fathers held near and dear, and what they expected us to hand down to posterity, this sort of collectivist thinking is not anywhere within that form of thought. It is intellectually disingenuous to say that a collective mindset is what's good for this nation. That ignores the fact that the individual popular sovereigns are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. The vitality of our nation really requires that we all be proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable rights. We cannot turn our back on that, and we cannot delegate that or negotiate away our fundamental and inalienable rights. Because if we lose our fundamental and inalienable rights, we lose everything. And that's something that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have devoted a lot of time to on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. And the reason we do so is it is that quintessential part of who we are, both as a nation and as a people, that has been ignored in our institutions of education and by our information media outlets. And this is because the Fabian socialists have worked incessantly, tirelessly, unyieldingly for the past century and a half to infiltrate all of these pillars of society. By corrupting and perverting those pillars of society, they can work forth their propagandistic goal and agenda to radically transform and change who we are, not only as a nation, but also as a people. And think about part of the reason why they want to create this sort of carte blanche amnesty. It's because they want to replace the American populace with a more docile population that has no connection to our history, and therefore would be less likely to complain about any types of attempted changes to the foundation and the entire governmental structure of our republic. And of course, one of the areas where we've seen this is when they continually repeat the phrase that the United States is a democracy. That has been so loosely used since the cessation of hostilities in the Civil War in 1865 that it's almost ingrained within society. It's a very troubling problem when you stop and think about it, because a democracy does not recognize the rights of the popular sovereign or the sovereign individual. That is why Benjamin Franklin described democracy as two wolves and a sheep voting for what's for dinner. Well, this tyranny of the majority that is the two wolves will defeat the sheep every time unless the sheep has certain protections, such as the fundamental and unalienable right to be armed. You see, that's why the Second Amendment is included within the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. All of this ties into a bigger overarching picture that describes who we are, not only as a nation and a people, but what our ideology is, what our political philosophy is, and that all traces its roots back to the very inception of the country over 230 years ago. And it's tragic that this isn't really taught in public schools anymore. It used to be that civics was an integral part of public education. It was considered a very important duty of our educational institutions to ensure that the up-and-coming generation was endowed with the knowledge of what we are as a nation and the proper scope, application, and function of our Federalist Republic. But we've moved away from that. We've moved to standardized testing that really does nothing to test this sort of knowledge. We've moved away from learning the important factors of life to this sort of social engineering that has been tweaked by Fabian socialists to create dependent minds. Well, that is the last thing that we need. And that is why it is so important for us all to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only the United States Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable rights, because it is through such knowledge that we will be able to stand up to those who would do everything in their power to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights, basically to turn us into serfs for this New Age feudalist type of government, as Alex de Tocqueville would have described the Fabian socialist attempts to take over the United States government. But the problem is, we have been worked to such an area through overzealous regulation, through governmental overreach, and a spineless, feckless, weak leadership of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, that people are just struggling to sustain themselves, to survive. It is becoming all but impossible to maintain a living in the United States, and we're attacking our retirees, and we're going after our veterans, and it makes no sense whatsoever other than this government is completely out of control, and it's by design. Again, it ties into that whole notion of the Cloward-Priven principle. And once they think that they've destabilized the government enough to reach a certain position to where the people are going to be unable to topple them, or at least not easily be able to topple them, they then accelerate their attacks on our institutions and traditions. You see, they try to attack the Pledge of Allegiance for including the word under God in it. You see, they try to force religious institutions to perform gay marriage ceremonies. Most recently, Barack Hussein Obama has demanded that religious institutions and charitable hospitals have to perform sex reorientation operations or sex change operations and abortions, whether that is against their deeply held religious principles or convictions or not. And that is all done under the auspices of claiming that if they receive any type of federal funding or licensure, then they are essentially a part of the state. That is a new age form of absolutism that is diametrically opposed to the tenets that created this country, to the natural law tenets that underpin all that we stand for and represent. And again, I don't think it has any place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. Therefore, in order to try and distract the American people and to attack them and to make them feel as though they are now a minority within their own country, they double down on their efforts of forcing what was once considered a perverse notion as normal. And you see this in the way that they do some of their advertisings, or the way that we see gay couples in almost all of popular culture and on television and in advertisements on television that's created by the Ad Council, meaning that our taxpayer dollars are going to fund this, and that's all part of this effort to try and normalize behavior that was once considered odd or not within the mainstream or perverse or unacceptable. It really is a diabolical thing that they're trying to work in because they want us to start accepting these things. And when we start accepting these things that were wholly objectionable in the past, it means that we can then start accepting things like the fundamental transformation of the nation as a whole. That's all part of a diabolical scheme which is truly not welcome in an open and honest society like that of the United States. But they have been working at this tirelessly and relentlessly for so long that far too many people just now think that it is normal, that this is acceptable, that this is the way that it has always been, because they haven't known any different. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. This is an orchestrated effort to really tear us apart and to drive a wedge between us, thereby pitting American citizen against American citizen, and all for some diabolical purpose. And you notice that they try and then claim that those of us that want to preserve our Constitution and to preserve the laws as they are, now we're bigots. We're hateful people. It's all the same line that they've used in the way that they try to revise our history, in the way that they try and teach that our founding fathers were just racist, sexist, homophobic people. But again, it's just not true. Why don't we ever hear the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media ever complain about the way that Islamic states deal with homosexuality? Because they don't put up with it. They don't tolerate it. They kill them on spot, oftentimes in the most barbaric and brutal fashions. But then we're told that we are Islamophobic. Even though they have orchestrated attacks against us, they have killed countless numbers of our citizens, and they are attempting to plunge this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours into absolute abject terror and fear. And it's all, again, to manipulate us, again, pushing us to the brink of raw emotionalism so that we then become malleable to their desires. They think we're a bunch of cowards. And with respect to the Fabian socialists, they are cowards in many ways, but this plays into their twisted machinations as well, because it's all based on a collectivist thought They think that it needs to be a collectivist knee-jerk reaction when, in fact, the American people have always been rough and rugged individualists. But that doesn't factor into their calculations, other than it's something that is abhorrent and should be destroyed. And so this is why you see them pushing to have bakers be sued for refusing to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and anyone who attempts to prevent transgendered people from going into a girl's restroom or a boy's restroom if they are obviously not of that sex originally, of committing a hate crime. But it also means that a lot of what they're doing is contradictory, and that too plays into this whole notion of moral relativism. Now, the more disingenuous aspect of all of this moral relativism that is being foisted on the American people by the Barack Hussein Obama regime and the Democrat Party and these nefarious Fabian socialists is, look, they're targeting the children. They're targeting the up-and-coming generation. And the reason they're doing this is they want it to be ingrained in them through this nefarious doctrine of social engineering. Because it's more easy to mold the minds of the youth. And believe it or not, that is something that Adolf Hitler attempted to do with the Hitler Youth. It was to try and normalize the Nazi doctrine at a very young age so that they would not think that any other form of political ideology, philosophy, or system would be applicable. It was all this type of cult of personality that was warped to fit Der Führer, or the leader. Well, we see a lot of that with Obama, and we see that there have been, throughout these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, things like children singing songs for Barack Hussein Obama's greatness and wonderful personality and attributes. You see, this sort of hero worship, it's bad. It's bad because it warps the up-and-coming generation. It's all done to manipulate them to become more accepting of these twisted Fabian socialist doctrines, which really should have no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. But this is the drastic stark and staunch realities that we have to face right now. These realities are there, clear as day, for us all to see, and if we're not careful, we risk losing our fundamental and inalienable rights. And as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, if we lose our rights, we lose everything, because our rights are the most important thing. You see, when you look back at the foundation of this country and the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, you will see that the greatest, or one of the greatest, of our founding fathers, George Mason, had concluded that all of us as individuals were endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental and inalienable rights, and that those rights were more important than government itself. And that the government could not, without due process under the law, take away those rights, belittle those rights, besmirch those rights, or make them something that they were not. And of course, what it all ties into is this idea of the natural order of things. The people are the ones that agree to the contractual document that is the United States Constitution. In other words, the people are a party to it, the government is a party to it, and if the government operates outside of the proper scope and boundary of that contract, then it is in breach of contract, and it is the duty and obligation of the people to hold the government accountable. And they were wholly cognizant and aware of the fact that governments tended to become corrupt over time, that there is this type of political entropy that exists in all forms of governmental systems, and you can see it all throughout history. Take, for instance, the latifundia system in Rome. The latifundia was a type of citizen-farmer republic, and the republic started off as a very virtuous type of thing, although not in the same light that our republic is, but it was designed to protect the rights of the certain citizens. But as time went on, those rights were eroded, and as crisis after crisis cropped up and appeared in their path, the people began to turn to a strong man in order to protect the republic. Except that this strong man that they turned to was Julius Caesar, and he proclaimed himself as the first emperor of Rome. And even though he was assassinated by members of the Senate, it was too late, because then his adopted son, Caesar Augustus, basically cemented the legacy of the Roman Empire. And that changed. Then at that point, the Senate was still there, but it was just a token. It was just a show. And by the time we reached the reign of Caligula, he was attempting to make his horse a consort in the Senate, or a member of the Senate, just to prove how worthless the Senate was. It had become largely ceremonial. If we're not careful, we could see that same type of twisted machination form here in the United States. We could lose our republic, and then we would have a representative system, but that would be representative in name only. All power would be exercised by the oligarchy of the federal government. And in fact, we're almost there already. And this is thanks in no small part to the feeble efforts, or the lack of any effort, by the gutless opposition party. Take for case and example the way that Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan allowed the Cromnibus bill to go forward, granting Obama everything that he could have ever dreamed of or wanted with respect to funding, including his illegal executive amnesty, all of his efforts to move around Congress because he has a telephone and a pen. But all of that goes against the very well-established order and the societal fabric of our representative Republican form of government. But again, it doesn't matter to them because they have their own agenda, and their own agenda is, by necessity, diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people of the United States. And that has been something they've been working towards for generations. It is a very damaging thing to see, because it works totally against all that we hold near and dear. It makes the country so far departed from its foundational roots that we don't even recognize what our original system of polity was. And that was something that George Washington attempted to warn us about in his farewell address, where he said that factionalization would cause us to lose sight of the bigger picture. That's why we mentioned on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, this so-called tyranny of a false unity. It's because they're calling upon us to just vote for a particular candidate because that candidate belongs to a particular political party. Well, the problem with that type of a system is it is losing sight of our fundamental and inalienable rights. It's losing sight of the fact that we are in direct threat of losing our representative Republican form of government and our fundamental and inalienable rights. And when you stop and think about how that plays into all of it, it really is troubling, because it is this organized effort to depose the people and to strip them of their rightful sovereign authority. And again, to go back to this notion of moral relativism, this is just part of it. The whole bathroom issue that has now become front and center in the concern of the public, particularly with places like Target and other stores that are agreeing to this, we see that they're purposefully trying to ram this agenda through. And they want us to think that we are just part of a minority that's hateful if we disagree with it. But the problem is, the vast majority of the American people don't agree with this. They never really have, because it goes against human nature. You see, again, they go against that which is natural and foist upon us that which is wholly unnatural, that which is perverse, oddball, out of character, out of sync with reality. But they are at such a position now that they think that they've amassed enough power that we really can't challenge them. But they are gravely mistaken if they think that we can't challenge them, and that we're not prepared to challenge them, because truth be told, we are prepared to challenge them. Of course, it means that we're going to have to come together and work towards this in a long, drawn-out process, and that we cannot expect instantaneous gratification, which has been something that I've noticed is a bit of a shortcoming with the right. And it's not to attack the right, because I am clearly a part of it. It is more of an observation that I've just noticed in my brief time on this earth. It's that because we think we're in the right, we think that it just makes logical sense that we can state what matters and change it in one fell swoop. The problem is that we're not dealing with people who are thinking rationally. We're not dealing with people who are using logic or reasoning. They are basing their entire arguments off of raw emotionalism. Again, to work the society up into such a fever pitch that we will make knee-jerk reactions, and that those knee-jerk reactions will help them fundamentally transform who we are both as a nation and as a people. And that's exactly what Barack Hussein Obama has dedicated himself to. That is what we have seen occur again and again and again throughout his disastrous two-term regime. And remember, it was his own acolyte, Rahm Emanuel, who said that you should never let a crisis go to waste. Well, this is what they mean. They go out, the government itself goes out and creates these multifaceted crises so that we then have to find a solution. And the solution that is always proffered is a loss of liberty and an increase in the power, scope, size, and application of the federal government, in direct violation of the natural law tenets that underpin not only our representative Republican form of government, but also our shared United States Constitution. And again, this is why they loathe and despise the Constitution. It's because the Constitution limits them and is supposed to create this sort of safety gap measure for the American people to ensure that no one branch of government, no singular entity or individual can willy-nilly trample upon our fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator or the God of nature. But now we see that they're even attacking this idea of freedom of religion and the free exercise of religion. They have purposefully misconstrued the entire notion of that doctrine, which is found within the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. And the reason they do that, and they are just twisted about this, but they do it because they want you to think that rights are provided to you by government. Because if the government can provide you with rights, then the government can take your rights away. It's always this double-edged sword that they use, and they use it to hew and cleave the American people, and to try and slice and dice our true prerogatives and all that we once held near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. It is truly a nefarious game that they play. And it's one that we should not accept, because it is by its nature wholly unacceptable, particularly when you keep in mind all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. But they are steadfast and stalwart in their efforts and in their initiative to drive a wedge between us. They are masters of using the tactics of divide and conquer, not only to distract the American people, but to pit us against one another. And when they do that, it begins to tear at the societal fabric and to tear the nation apart at the seams, to essentially remove the cohesive nature of our country. But what is it that draws us together? What is it that binds us together as a nation? It is none other than the supreme law of the land, our United States Constitution. And so that's why you see this increased push for balkanization, and all of this moral relativism is a part of that. Notice that with respect to the group, which I think is basically a terrorist group, Black Lives Matters, they are there trying to say that we shouldn't hold black criminals responsible because of the color of their skin. Now, who is it that is really pushing a racist message here? It's certainly not those of us that believe in equal protection under the law. It's certainly not those of us who are proposing a restoration and a return to strict adherence to the natural law tenets and the fundamental principles contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution. But that's not the way that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are painting the picture. They are dictating a narrative that is wholly opposed to that. Why? Because again, they want to manipulate you. They want you to think that this is some sort of fundamentalist position. And they've even gone so far as to compare us to the Islamo-fascist barbarians in ISIS. But in fact, if you recall all of these efforts to destroy Confederate monuments, which were actually created as a form of reconciliation to show that the nation was healing, then you see that they're no different than ISIS that's going out to destroy history. They move to destroy this to erase the whole aperture of knowledge that, hey, look, there was a time when people disagreed with the federal government, even if it was for things that wouldn't fit in modern society. Maybe that's something we could do ourselves. And that works against them as well. And they're like the communist Chinese that engaged in the Cultural Revolution under Mao. And what that was all about was tearing apart the pre-existing system in order to replace it with communist Chinese doctrine and philosophy. Well, their doctrine and philosophy was all about erasing that which came before because they didn't want to have any challenge to their new system. They knew that they could not compete in the marketplace of ideas, and therefore any type of contrary thought or contrarian message would threaten to topple everything that they were working towards achieving, and they couldn't tolerate that. And so when they attack this, when they move towards rewriting everything, they also want to attack the traditions of morality. Because again, that is something where they could say if there's any type of perversion within this new regime, then that is something that would challenge them as well. It would work against all that they hold as being true and powerful. And therefore, they need human foibles to be acceptable, but also to play it against itself if necessary. And this is kind of where the paranoia that exists in all sorts of those tin pot dictator style systems comes into play. It's because if they have these twisted notions and machinations, they can play anything and everything against anyone at any time. And you know that people like Barack Hussein Obama, who are narcissist and power hungry, just absolutely love the idea of being able to implement such a system, because they think then that they can wield the reins of political power without any sort of restraint whatsoever. And that ties into why they would play around with this notion of moral relativism, because then any morality can be made correct at any time. And then anyone at any time, if they go against the party line, can then be attacked and ostracized as standing up against the true benefit of society as a whole. Of course, does this make any sense whatsoever? No, not really, because it is diametrically opposed to everything that matters. And again, it makes it to where truth is whatever they define it to be. It is really an Orwellian nightmare in its scope and application. And we see that they have accelerated this because they're wanting us to feel as though the nation is more destabilized than ever, that they are closer to achieving their goal than ever before. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth, because we will work at the grassroots level, we will never give up, and we will always fight these nefarious efforts to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. But by necessity, what they are working towards is depriving us of those rights so that they can then more easily manipulate, crush, and destroy us. That ties into their twisted goal. Their goal has always been about redefining who we are not only as a nation, but also as a people. And that is troubling in and of itself, because what it works towards is really destroying us. And that has always been their goal. It has always been what they've worked towards and what they have desired. So you see, again, it always comes back to this effort to destroy the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty. And again, it ties into this whole notion that they want to redefine sovereignty. They want to define it as being in the hands of the government itself, when that is diametrically opposed to everything that our founding fathers ever designed this nation to be about. And it really is troubling, because what it does is it pits us over ourselves, and it makes us question what is true or not. And it really is troubling, because what they try to do is make us forget that which is important. And of course, as we have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that which is most important is our fundamental and inalienable rights. But of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media certainly don't want you to think of it in that way, because again, that challenges their power and their authority, and really also works against their twisted propagandistic goal and agenda to forward this Fabian socialist nonsense that really has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. Yet they are wholly convinced that what they're doing is workable, that it is what this nation needs and wants. Of course, again, nothing really could be further from the truth than that, because what they are working upon and orchestrating upon the people is a perversion. It is something that goes against all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And this is again why it is so important for us to have this fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution, and thereby also our fundamental and inalienable rights, because then it becomes easier to spot these efforts, and thereby easier to resist these efforts, because, mark my words, folks, these people are never going to give up on their attempts to tear this nation apart at the seams. It is an intrinsic part of who they are. It is a part of their political ideology, their political philosophy, but above all, their political identity. They identify themselves with being part of this so-called counterculture. It's all designed to stick it to the man, except what they don't realize is that they themselves are the man, that they themselves are shrouding themselves in the edicts of fascism and totalitarianism, which also is foreign and alien to our representative Republican form of government. And again, it is so twisted the way that this doctrine of moral relativism ties into all of that as well, because it works against what matters. And what matters, as I said earlier, is our rights. And they want you to think that they provide the rights and that you are denying the rights of others. So you see, they try and do a little bit of reverse psychology here, folks. They want you to feel guilty about holding on to your traditional beliefs, to your traditional notions, to that which you know inherently in your heart of hearts to be right. And why do they do that? Because again, it's about control. They think they can control the narrative, they can control what you think, and thereby they can change your hearts and minds. Ultimately, it comes down to this aspect that they think they can control the world. And they want to do it by controlling thought. They want to do it by controlling the political narrative, the popular culture narrative, and they do it to warp society. And there really is no other way to describe this. You can't sugarcoat that or candy coat that, nor can you sweep it under the rug or ignore it, because it is blaringly open and obvious. That is their twisted machinations, their goals, their agendas, and it's diametrically opposed to all that we do hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. But more than that, it is designed to pit us against one another, for the sole purpose of allowing them to amass greater power for themselves in illicit fashion and taking it away from us. The Founding Fathers knew that government, if there was not a separation of powers, if there was not a safety valve, which all of those separations of power and safety valves are being ignored right now as I speak into this microphone, then the government would very easily become tyrannical. It's the very nature of government to diametrically oppose the hopes, dreams, aspirations, and consent of the governed. But you see, I use a very specific phrase there, consent of the governed. That is one of those natural law tenets that is one of the oldest. It traces its origins back to Magna Carta, which was signed on the field of Runnymede in 1215 by King John. Yes, the one who was Prince John in all of the Robin Hood stories, that John. And, of course, at that time, it meant that it was consent of the baronage, but as the doctrine went down through the annals of history until it finally reached the time of our founding fathers, some 560 plus years later, it was perfected, with the idea that popular sovereignty rests in the hands of the people, and that government is only just and righteous when it is done with the consent of the people, and not just the people as some majority or minority, which is what a direct democracy would only acknowledge, but the rights of the people as sovereign individuals. That ties in to why we are a representative republic, why we have a virtuous republic, and why we have to have morality. And this whole doctrine of moral relativism is designed at its very core and heart to attack that notion, to deliberately destabilize all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, so that they can then work their twisted machinations and make it a permanent part of society. So they're trying to superheat the society itself, to restructure it to be some sort of Fabian socialist dystopia. Again, something that is wholly foreign and alien to the American people. And they want us to forget our national identity. That's why you see all of this balkanization and the pushing of moral relativism is a central tenet of that. It perpetuates the division and the divisiveness that is just running rampant within the societal fabric of the United States right now. They are the ones pushing division. It's not us. We are pushing for the only thing that unifies the American people, the only thing that has ever unified us, our supreme law of the land, that of the United States Constitution, and therefore it falls upon our shoulders and our shoulders alone to defend it. Again, this is why it is so important that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, because then we understand what it is that they're doing, and we can then take proactive steps to prevent them from further destruction of this country before it becomes irreparable harm. Because the way they see it, they're going to try and overwhelm each and every one of us so that we lose faith in the Constitution. You see, that's the darkest secret of what their method is about, what their aggrandizement is about. It is about pitting American citizen against American citizen to the point where we think that the Constitution's not defending us, or that it has become outdated, or that it cannot keep up with the flow of times, and therefore it must be holistically replaced with this Fabian socialist dystopia. It really is a twisted system that they have created, and it goes against all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. Now, I know it sounds like that this is a repetitive theme, but that's because all of these attacks come back to one singular thing, and that singular thing is the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. It comes back to this very notion of what they are working for is the absolute destruction of our system of government, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable rights. This has been their goal for the last century and a half, and they have refused to relent upon it. And they will never relent upon it because they think they are that close to achieving victory for themselves. And that's the last thing that we need to allow them to do. Again, folks, this is why we are called upon to be the watchmen for our fundamental and inalienable rights. It's why we have to stand firm against these cancerous doctrines like that of political correctness and that of moral relativism. because all of those are being used as tools to attack us, to destroy the very societal fabric and foundation of our once thriving country. And that's what's truly nefarious about everything that they're doing, and it's why they are so dangerous, because they will never relent. They are incessant, and it's because they have been working in incremental steps for so long that they think that they've worked up enough momentum going within the country that it will be impossible to stop their twisted machinations, and that's why they are going to push ever harder, ever faster, ever more incessantly, irrespective of whether that really brings up a lot of anger within the people or not. And that in and of itself shows just how dangerous their mindset and their mentality is, because it works against everything that is of the utmost importance in this country. And believe me, folks, we are only at the beginning of this. They are not going to abandon this push for moral relativism. Expect to see it in pop culture. Expect to see it become more flagrantly thrown around within the confines of popular culture so that it becomes a normal aspect of society. But that's not what it is. It is still perverse. It is still out of sync with the way that people normally feel. And with respect to the transgender restroom thing or gay marriage, it's also against the way that marriage was originally created, for the purpose of natural reproduction and for creating that safe, harmonious, stable environment in which to rear children and to promote the future of a society. So in a sense, what we're seeing with what they're doing is this really suicidal approach to things, because by pushing this narrative, what they're really doing is working to tear apart the future of the country. But again, it's because they want to work in a type of future that coincides with their twisted machinations, with this Fabian socialist dystopia. That's also why you see Barack Hussein Obama using the Department of Housing and Urban Development to try and tear apart these middle-class neighborhoods and communities to further his left-wing agenda, because it was starting to wither on the vine there. And there's going to be a lot of resistance with that, and that's why you see they adopt this jackbooted thug-like mentality of attacking the community's freedom of speech. Why? Again, because they cannot tolerate any resistance. This is why they have to work everything from a crisis fever pitch, because they want people to do this while they're really, really worked up emotionally speaking, so that they don't think through the consequences of their actions. And that's why you always see the phrase that has been uttered by the so-called commensurate and punditry on the right of these so-called unintended consequences. Ultimately, I don't think there are unintended consequences. I think what it comes down to is these people simply don't give a damn. That it's all about them, and that it's all about pushing forth their narrative come hell or high water, screw what anybody else thinks. That has always been the way that they have acted. That is always why they push this moral relativist thing. Because then if something happens, they can say, well, look, it's just, it didn't happen to be right for them, but it's right for everybody else because there is no right or wrong. You see, it's all about obfuscating the truth, about creating this false dichotomy and narrative in which any perverse behavior can become normalized or acceptable. Pardon me. And it's also why they go out of their way to attack the institutions within society, whether it be the institution of marriage, the institution of our military, the institution of education, the institution of family. It's all interrelated, and it all goes towards this perverse doctrine of the state running everything. Remember that one of the phrases that was attributed to Aunt Hillary, Madam Clinton over there, who is the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party, is that it takes a village to raise a child. Now, what exactly is meant by that, other than they're trying to say that the individual sovereign parents are not responsible for raising their child, that they are incapable of raising their child in a proper fashion, and that it takes the government to raise the child? Think of it also as the lines that Obama uttered during the 2012 election cycle, when he said that if you are a small business owner, you didn't build that. Somebody else did. That you had to rely upon everything. Essentially, it takes a village to build a business. It's poppycock. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of malarkey that has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States. But they don't care. They are going to double down on these efforts. They are going to continue to attack us because that's what they believe is necessary and proper. But it's anything but necessary and proper. If anything, it's improper and unnecessary and destructive. But that is their goal. That is what they have worked towards for generation upon generation. And now they are so close they can taste the victory. That is why it is now more important than ever that we come together in solidarity and unity for social issues as well as the Constitution. Because all of the other concerns, how everyone's trying to say the economy needs to be our ultimate concern, the economy is but a mere symptom of these attacks, of these concerted efforts to tear us apart. It's all rooted in this departure and divorcement from our natural law tenets and the supreme law of the land, which is none other than the United States Constitution itself. But again, this is not the narrative you will ever hear from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Again, because it is contradictory to their twisted, propagandistic notion, agenda, and purpose. Well, once we realize that that is what they are working towards and that that is what they have always been pushing, it begins to become all the more clear as to why they would be pushing this moral relativist nonsense. And one of the areas where we've really seen it, I'm sure you've all, if you've got television, seen those ads of love has no labels. They're trying to make that acceptable. Those two lipstick lesbians lip-locking on that commercial. It's disgusting that our taxpayer dollars are going towards that. It's disgusting that we aren't allowed to have a greater say over that, because really that is a waste of money to try and do that sort of social engineering. But again, it is part of this propagandistic notion and narrative. The government shouldn't actually be making advertisements at all. Taxpayer money should not be going to this nonsense at all. Where in the Constitution do we see that that is a necessary and proper function of government? Of course, it's not in there. It's in Article 9, Section Existent, Clause 0. It's all a bunch of twisted malarkey, but it's about expanding the scope, breadth, and power of the federal government at the expense of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. That is what it has always been about with them. And they're doubling down on those notions, and they're doubling down on those narratives come hell or high water. It just does not matter. Because in the end, they think we don't matter. It's about their own power. You think that the Affordable Care Act was about providing you with decent health care? Would it be a moral thing to do to force everyone else to pay for everyone else's health care instead of, I don't know, allowing people to be individuals and to make choices on their own to promote the free will that was God-given to them? You see, there is the true narrative. There is the true disconnect that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will do everything in their power to tear down, to ignore, to sweep aside, to push into the gutter because they don't believe it. Again, everything they do is diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that underpin not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our representative Republican form of government. You see, all of the problems that are facing this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours can be traced back to this central dogmatic tenet of fundamentally transforming the United States of America, changing us away from a representative Republican form of government to some twisted Fabian socialist agenda and regime that is unrecognizable when you look at the way that the Founding Fathers framed this Constitution and nation. And it all ties into the way that the Fabian socialists have always been about perverting a country, destroying their history, going against all that they hold near and dear, again, because it challenges them. Why is it that everything has to be about these certain groups? They say that we need bigger government to try and create a false sense of equality. Why? Why is that necessary? Why is that what would make the government stronger? And not just the government, but the people. Because their argument is it's for the best interest of the people. But they never fully explain it. It's sort of like how Donald J. Trump never explains his policy positions or how he is going to accomplish all of these verbose and grandiose promises that he's made on the campaign trail. Well, it's because they really aren't doing that. It's like when Obama went in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and said, "If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Period. If you like your health care system or your health insurance plan, you can keep your health insurance plan, period." But again, it was lies. It was nothing but a bunch of lies. And then we had the chief architect of the Obamacare bill come out and say that they were basically building this off of the stupidity of the American voter. But the joke's on him because the vast majority of the American voters saw through it. The problem is that the détente wing of the gutless opposition party, and indeed the gutless opposition party itself, when they had a majority, refused to play ball. They refused to take a principled stance. Just as we now see that there is this movement within the gutless opposition party to call for a tyranny of false unity behind an unacceptable and untenable candidate that is none other than the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump. Why? So that we can continue to bow down, capitulate, and collaborate with the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists? You know, Trump says everything is negotiable. Everything is up for negotiation. But that is wrong too. Not everything is up for negotiation. Certainly our fundamental and inalienable rights are not up for negotiation. Certainly our constitutionally endowed representative republic should not be up for negotiation, but in his mind it is. Why? Because when you remember that he sat in front of that CNN town hall and said that the three most important and pivotal functions of the federal government is to provide education, healthcare, and housing. Again, there is proof that he has never fully read the Constitution, and that his past statements, which were uttered by his own lips, that he never fully read it because he saw no value in it, comes to fruition. He has no idea what the proper role and function of government is. The proper role and function of government is to protect commerce and to protect the ability of the people to exercise their fundamental and inalienable rights. But it is not to be the guardian of the people. It is not to provide the people with free health care and housing. Ultimately, that duty, that obligation, and that responsibility falls squarely on our shoulders as popular sovereigns. That is what it means to be self-determinate. That is why self-responsibility, self-accountability, and self-determination are the trifecta of what makes this country great. And that is why our Constitution is the longest running in all of world history. It is because it entrusts the American people with the duty, obligation, and above all, the responsibility to stand up for what they believe is right, what they understand in their heart of hearts to be the proper scope and application of their lives. Of course, again, you're never going to hear this from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Common Core education will never teach it that way because, again, it challenges their authority because what they're doing is acting in a way that is extra-constitutional. They are acting in a way that is propping up this Fabian socialist message and agenda, which really should have no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. And again, this is why we have stated numerous times on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that we have to be cognizant and aware of these direct and diabolical threats to that which matters most. If you look at the news, you don't hear much of anyone talking about the Constitution. Certainly not since Texas Senator Ted Cruz officially suspended his official bid for the White House. And the reason you don't hear that is neither one of the presumptive nominees for their respective political parties actually believes in the Constitution, actually wants the Constitution to go forward. Now, one of the bigger differences between both Hillary Rotten Clinton and Donald J. Trump is that Hillary Clinton knows what's in the Constitution. She knows it. She's an attorney. She has to know what's in there. It's just that she has a twisted way of looking at it, and she will try and use it against itself. What makes Donald Trump more dangerous than Hillary Clinton is that he doesn't know what's in it, and he doesn't care to, which means that he will do anything to further his own agenda. That means he'll be more of a loose cannon than even Barack Hussein Obama has been throughout his disastrous two-term regime. We can ill afford to allow our nation to go through something like that. And certainly, the last thing that we ought to be doing is attaching our name in support to such an unacceptable position and such an unacceptable development. Yet, here we are. We find that these same nefarious forces, which in 2008 claimed that we had to support John McCain, and then again in 2012 that we had to support Mitt Romney because they were better than the alternative. Why do they say that every election? Why do we always hear that same message when, in fact, the voting of the lesser of two evils has furthered this country to the left and has done nothing to stop the deathward spiral of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours? You see, it comes down to this whole notion of what they are preaching, and the message that they are fronting on the American people is diametrically opposed to what we should be doing. Again, it was John Quincy Adams who said that no matter what, you should vote your conscience, even if that means voting alone, because at least you know that your vote is not wasted. Now, isn't it funny that that statement is wholly different than the message that is being crammed down our throats by those who are seeking to implement a tyranny of false unity upon us? Isn't it amazing that the entire doctrine of what they are pushing is diametrically opposed to the message he was purveying? Now, folks, the reason that the message of those who are pushing for a tyranny of false unity differs so much from that of John Quincy Adams is that the point that John Quincy Adams was making is rooted in the natural law tenets that are themselves, by their nature, timeless. This idea of party unity goes into the very sort of disastrous consequences that George Washington was attempting to warn us about in his farewell address. These factions that are created means that we lose sight of what is important. And as I have stated all throughout this evening's solo flight special, it is the Constitution in conjunction with our rights. You see, what you need to be empowered is this knowledge of the Constitution, and to be stalwart in its defense and in promoting its continued vitality and viability. Because these nefarious forces are working in conjunction together in an attempt to strip and deprive you of your fundamental and inalienable rights. And if they do that, then they can strip and deprive you of everything. Your property, your life, your liberty, your sacred honor. What happened to the notion of sacred honor? We certainly don't see it with moral relativism. Moral relativism is diametrically opposed to the very thought of having a sort of belief in a type of sacred honor, because that means that there has to be something that is either right or something that is wrong, that there is truth and untruth. But you notice that a lot of times particularly with respect to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. When they trudge politicians out there, they don't like to say the word lie. Again, it's because they're buying into this moral relativist type of machination and ideology, which states that there is no one truth or untruth. They'll say, oh, he bent the truth. What does that even mean? How is that applicable? Is that even logical? Can that even exist? And the answer is, it's not logical. Again, it's all based off of raw emotionalism, as the entire Fabian socialist agenda is. And make no mistake about it, the détente wing of the gutless opposition party is about advocating Fabianism. Why? Because that is the way that they can increase and illicitly amass power unto themselves at the expense of we the people. But for all of those who turned to Donald J. Trump thinking that he was going to be some messianic figure that would bring an end to the political corruption that is plaguing and afflicting this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, never forget that he was the one that allowed this to happen. That he was the one for the past 3 decades straight funding it. Remember, he said in 2012, with respect to Mitt Romney's self-deportation talk, with respect to the torrent of illegal aliens who flooded into our nation, that was mean-spirited, and that we just need to let them back in. It's why his so-called proposed immigration reform plan and policy that has allegedly been drafted by Jeff Sessions, Senator of Alabama, it has that touchback amnesty provision. In other words, if they leave the country, then they can be put back on a fast track. But the laws that currently exist and that are already on the books say they can't. Why do we always subvert our best interests? Why do we always kowtow to those who are viewed to be as oppressed? Again, it ties back into this notion that I opened tonight's program with, moral relativism. There is no right, there is no wrong, words have no meanings, and if words have no meanings, laws have no meanings. But remember the phrase that I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men. What does that mean? Well, again, it goes to that sacred principle and notion of equal protection under the law. That is what we stand for. That is what we must stand for. Because if we abandon that, then we are giving up on the roots and foundational principles of our nation. That is what they have been working tirelessly to achieve. And they think that they are on the brink of success. Again, this is why we have vowed to be the new resistance, to stand up to these diabolical efforts that they are putting forth to tear this nation apart at the seams, because everything that they are doing is deeply rooted in something that is wholly foreign and alien to everything that we hold near and dear in this country. But again, they don't care. It to them does not matter. As long as they get their way. And their way is the utter annihilation of the United States, both as a nation and a people. And make no mistake about it, folks, Donald J. Trump falls into this broad categorization as well. This is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about his consistently inconsistent positions for 10 months straight now. Folks, he is not who he claims to be. He is the top donor of Hillary Clinton when she was the senator from the state of New York. He kowtowed around with the pedophile friend, that Epstein guy, who was friends and buddy-buddy with his other friend, Bill Clinton. Is that really what we have come down to? Choosing between the top donor of a corrupt politician and a corrupt politician herself? Why is it that we always find ourselves having to choose the most god-awful candidates available? It's ridiculous, and it is by design. It is what the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been working for in election cycle after election cycle. They want to choose the candidates. They want to control the narrative. And then they can continue to push this country ever further to the left in absolute and complete and total disregard of all those things that matter to each and every one of us. And again, this is why you see in pop culture this entrenching of this attempt to normalize homosexuality and transgender issues, and anyone who disagrees with it, well, they're the racist, bigoted, hateful, sexist, homophobic jackasses. I mean, it's so stupid because it is clearly, blatantly, and obviously a straw man argument, but they don't care. Again, as I have said throughout this evening's program, it's not about facts, logic, or reality. It is about a propagandistic narrative designed to make everyone emote so that they become more malleable like putty in the hands of these kabuki puppet masters that want to dominate the political narrative and to redefine who we are both as a nation and a people. It is such a dire strait that we find ourselves in that we can't ignore it any longer. And we must spread word and knowledge of the Constitution. We can never relent because the Constitution is the key that will bring us back from this sort of destitute destruction. And again, folks, they do this to work against us, to pit us against one another, to ensure that we can never stop their twisted and diabolical efforts. But we must, because of the fact that we are endowed with the authority, and we alone are endowed with that authority to save this country. Again, it's why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have reiterated so often on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that we need to stop looking for some messianic figure to come down from the heavens and save us. Only we can save ourselves. That is by design. It's as Alexander Hamilton said, one of the few correct things he ever said, and I know that I've included this in the past 3 or so episodes, but it is because it bears repeating here. If we must have an enemy at the head of government, let it be someone for whom we are not responsible, so that we may wholly oppose them and reiterate what is right, to reiterate the principles that are correct. Now, he was doing that to purport his own political beliefs, and of course, I disagreed with 90% of them, but it shows that he was taking a principled stance, a stance in which he understood that the principles held by individuals, sovereign individuals, was more important than anything else. Now, did he actually believe that in his own practices? Not so much, but that is the type of approach we need to take. We need to remember that our position as popular sovereigns is sacrosanct. It is the most important thing we have, because that is how we have our rights, that is how we live free, that is how we maintain the economy, that is how we maintain everything about our quality and standard of living and life. But that again has been tarnished by the incessant efforts of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, these nefarious Fabian socialists who are doing everything within their power to tear this nation apart at the seams. Again, it cannot be that Donald Trump supports the Constitution, because his own words, his own actions, his own funding shows that that is clearly not the case. And therefore, it is impossible to say that I support both the United States Constitution and Donald Trump. It's just not possible. You either support the Constitution or you don't, and it is most apparent and most clear that Donald Trump does not support the Constitution. Again, folks, this is what we have been warning about for 10 months straight now. And of course, the branch Trumpidians have ignored our warning. They have ignored why it is important to look to the Constitution. It's because they don't care about the Constitution, but we do. We do because we realize that it is the supreme law of the land. We realize that it is the very linchpin that keeps us free as a nation and a people, and it is why we have vowed to you time and again here on Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, never to abandon the Constitution, the defense of it, the spreading of the knowledge of it, because it is that sacrosanct, that important, and that pivotal to the sustained vitality and viability of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. If we turn our back on it now, then we become hypocrites, charlatans, hucksters, no different than the politicians that we loathe and despise, who have gone out of their way to thumb their noses at us. But they forget that the true, ultimate wielders of sovereignty are we the people, and we will never back down, we will never surrender, we will never capitulate, we will never collaborate with them. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to send back our flight attendant with one last round of alcohol so that you can maintain your moral compass and not have to buy into moral relativism. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you have either here on our YouTube page or on our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot page, which also includes audio blogs, and our Cafe Press account, which includes all sorts of goodies, trinkets, clothing, and whatnot, drinking glasses, so you can enjoy that last round of alcohol with either our logo on it or our first-class passenger logo. Folks, there is surely something there that you'll like. Go ahead and give us a little bit of support so we can continue to bring you this indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment as we always do. Thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We will see you next time. Do take